Hello everyone. As you'll all know, as a smaller YouTuber, I don't often get much choice in the cars that come to me for review. I really appreciate it when you tell me in the comment section what cars you'd like to see me film, but I'm often powerless to do much about that. However, I'm very pleased to say that today we are going to be reviewing this, the much requested Alpine A110, thanks to channel follower John. Now, John's over there watching me film, and he's probably not liking the fact that I'm saying that I'm not actually a huge fan of this car for one very simple reason, and I'll be totally honest and transparent about that. I have yet to drive this car. My sum total of driving experience in this car is about 500 meters down the road when we had to go and grab something from my house quickly. But in stylistic terms, I think the Alpine has committed, in my opinion, and style is very subjective, a cardinal sin. They've essentially taken the old Alpine A110, copied it a bit and made it a modern car, and I generally don't like when cars do that. However, I will say that in the flesh this car does work an awful lot better than in pictures. That is a very Lotus-like quality, and there's an awful lot to like about this car if, like me, you are a big fan of Lotus style cars. So here's the strange thing: the more that I stand here, talk and look at this car, the more it's growing on me, and I've only been looking at it for about 10 minutes. One of the areas in photos that I liked the least was this rear 3/4 section here, because in many pictures it just looks a bit too bulbous and too stubby and just a little bit wrong. However, if you look at it from the angle I've placed the camera, actually the proportions of this work pretty well. Renault and Alpine, whatever you want to call it, have been very, very lucky with this car because it is mid-engined. Unlike the earlier cars, which are often rear-engined, they can keep the bonnet line nice and low, and that does certainly help the car. Now, this car in many ways is very, very closely related mechanically to the Lotus that I so love. They've taken the engine and powertrain from a front-engined, front-wheel drive car, in this case the Renault Sport Megane, and put it in the middle of the car. So you've got a 1.8 litre turbocharged engine producing about 250 horsepower. And that's propelling a car which weighs only about 1,100 kilos. One thing that really wicked me off about the Top Gear review of this car, other than the fact that they burnt one to a cinder, was the fact that they seemed to do the entire review without mentioning the Lotus Elise. They acted as if this idea of a nice, small, super lightweight sports car was a new thing. It isn't at all. Now, the weight figure. Alpine will tell you that this car, which is a Premier edition by the way, that means that it comes with every option that you could possibly tick, and I'll talk about those more when we're on the move. They will claim this car weighs 1,103 kilos. Now, I've found a nice little website, a French website actually, which tells me the real weight figures of these cars, and I've used this website for a few reviews where manufacturers are a little bit creative about the weights of their cars. Now, this car, quoted weight, claimed weight, 1,103, and bear in mind there's always going to be some variance in this. You know, even different paint colors really can weigh different amounts. That's no joke. You get different option packs, all that sort of stuff. So the real weight of this car, 1,106 kilos. They are only 3 kilos out. That is as close to perfect as you will ever get. That's a shocking level of honesty. Now, to put that into perspective, Alfa Romeo will claim that their 4C is about 895 kilos, you know, roughly Elise weight, or about 200 kilos lighter than this, a substantial amount for a car with the same power. However, the actual weight of their car is 120 kilos more. It is still lighter than this car, but it is certainly less well equipped as well. So I think the Alpine is pretty good. In weight terms compared to a Lotus, this is a little bit lighter than a V6 Exige, obviously quite a bit heavier than an Elise, but on the inside, it's a totally different thing. The premise of the Premier Edition was to give you essentially all of the options available on the car for a better price. Now that included things like this lovely upgraded Focal sound system, forged alloys, blue calipers, a smattering of A badges all over the car. You've also got these little metal kick panels down here, the obligatory plaque, a telemetric system, which is essentially their version like Porsche's Sport Chrono, and will allow you to download tracks to the car's built-in nav system, so you can, of course, time your laps and do all sorts of funky things like that. However, from the interior, this is like most of the A110 range. It has these nice sporty bucket seats, which nearly all of the cars come with. There is a comfort option, but really, these are super comfortable. These are the sort of seats that I really, really like. They've got, of course, microfiber inserts and this nice diamond stitched leather on the side, and they look pretty awesome. Some of the metal stuff in here does remind me a lot more of an Italian car than anything German or British. In fact, the overall level of fit and finish in here is very, very high. Only a couple of small missteps have really been made, like the sort of slightly cheap looking mirror adjustment down here, but seriously, if you've got a Lotus Elise and you're considering an upgrade, in terms of fit and finish, this thing is just miles ahead of anything Lotus is doing. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I think this thing feels better inside even than my Evora did, and the Evora is a much more expensive car than one of these. But of course, all people talk about with regards to these cars is how they drive, and that really is going to be the making or breaking of this car. So let's take it out on one of my favourite Lotus testing roads and see how she does. So, on the road and first impressions. To me, comparisons with an Elise are inevitable. You simply cannot look at a car like this with the design ethos that this has and avoid them. However, sitting in this, it feels about as different from an Elise as you could possibly imagine. Not only is this interior just made to a much higher standard, and the whole car, even at this sort of 40 mile an hour that I'm currently doing, is just much quieter, much more refined. I mean, this is after all a coupe, so really it should be, but you feel like you're a lot further away from the road. In an Elise, you've got the sensation of being nearly sat on top of the tarmac, but in this, you've got actually a much more GT car-like sensation. You're sat quite low down, you've got the bonnet there, which you can't see much of, but actually the car that this is really reminding me of more than anything, I don't particularly know why, is my Z4M Coupe, which had the same sort of sensation of a small, more intimate cockpit, and I wouldn't use the word cramped because that's not fair to it at all. I still have plenty of room that I could move back in the seat. I would like the seat lower. There is no adjustment within it to do that, but I've seen the mounting points, and I'm pretty sure if you wanted to, you could make it lower. The car has a dual clutch 7-speed gearbox, and this is one of the parts of the car that doesn't necessarily appeal to me. When I got my Evora, I deliberately wanted a car that wasn't turbocharged and didn't have an automatic gearbox of some sort. At the time, the Alpha 4C came out, and one of the reasons I didn't like that was the fact that it had a small turbocharged engine and a dual clutch paddle shift gearbox. And for a car like that, I just thought, well, why have you done that? I can sort of understand the turbocharged engine, but the choice of auto gearbox, it didn't make an awful lot of sense. Now, turbocharged engines are here to stay, and there's nothing I can do or say to stop them taking over the world. Dual clutch gearboxes, however, are a bit of a curiosity because in mainstream cars, they're currently being replaced by traditional auto boxes, particularly the ubiquitous ZF 8-speed. However, driving this car at town speeds as I was, just manoeuvring about and getting it onto this road, it's very, very well behaved when it's sat in automatic mode. Not all dual clutch boxes are the same, my M3 in particular. Okay, it's an earlier version of the system, but it's awful in town. This car has an LCD instrument display, which is pretty clear and easy to read, fairly high res, which is nice to see, not all of them are. It's got a little French tricolor at the bottom in case you forgot the fact that this was a French car. Otherwise, it's a pretty good place to be. I'm just going to let it warm through a little bit, then put my foot down. A toggle switch is here. Not the greatest feeling, but But honestly, you're not going to buy a car of this kind for switches. You're going to buy it for the driving experience. I've put this car in sport mode for the drive. Here's what sport mode changes. There are no changes to the suspension because it is a passive setup. That's a good thing. I like passive setups. I think they're generally much better than adaptive setups because adaptive setups, well, there's just many ways to get it wrong. What it does change is the throttle response, the noise from the exhaust, the steering weight, and that's an interesting choice that they've made in this car. It has electromechanical steering. You'd have thought with all of this car's focus on lightness and the driving experience that it might have unassisted steering. It doesn't. And I think that maybe putting the power steering in is a good decision. I bet there's a load of people out there who would have bought something like an Exige or a 4C, but they went and sat in it, tried to move it out of the car park and went, nope, I've had enough, I'm not dealing with that. It's something that makes the omission of a manual gearbox in the 4C even more curious, but in this, it just makes sense. Pulling away from a junction is quite easy, and I noticed that the paddles in this car are fixed to the steering column, not the steering wheel. I personally like that setup. I'm not a big fan of paddles that move with the wheel because they're never where you left them. This way, you always know where to find them when you need them. The paddles themselves are pretty big as well. They are metal, and the click is not too bad. It's not the best in the world, but it's pretty solid, pretty reassuring, and you definitely know when you've pressed them. In terms of price, I know a lot of people talked about this car as being really, really expensive, but honestly, I don't think that it is. Now, if you're going to compare it with an Elise, well, an Elise starts at somewhere in the low 40s, and you can spend over 50 grand, especially if you want to go for a Cup or something like that. Now, a V6 Exige is going to cost you mid-50s for the 350, something like that, plus options. You can easily spend again 60 grand on them, right up to about 110 if you want a full Cup 430, but that's a very, very different car to this. Now, they are going to be faster cars, but they are also much, much more focused in their intent. This car, the current owner, used it for a little mini booze cruise to Calais and back, and he fit in the car, being a little bit creative, 19 cases of wine. That's 19 times 6 bottles. That's a very, very French measure if ever I heard one, and I think the makers would somehow approve. Now, if we compare this car to the Porsche branded equivalent, on the face of it, you might say, well, this doesn't offer excellent value for money. I personally would disagree. It's quite clear that this car is aimed at a slightly different driver, but of course it doesn't make half the compromises or require half the compromises from its owner as you would need in an Elise or in a 4C. Getting in and out of this is very easy. You've got that storage space for all of your wine, and you've got a stereo that works and is actually half decent. You can listen to it on the motorway, and the road noise is, according to this car's owner, much better than the 981 Cayman that he sold for it. And I definitely believe him. However, when you look at this car's price, and they're advertised at sort of starting at just under 50 grand, and this car is sort of just over, well, that's the price that you're going to pay for one. Well, Porsche, as we know, have this fetish for the options list, and you can spec up a Boxster or a Cayman to slightly scary levels, and yes, I'm sure they're probably going to be quicker than this car, but then when they can cost £25,000–30,000 more, they really should be. They're also everywhere, and if, like me, you appreciate something that's a little bit different, well, I hadn't seen one of these on the road before it turned up on my driveway, and they've been out for a good sort of 6 months now, and this is the first one that I've spotted. So if you like having a slightly rare and unusual car, it's a good pick. Let's see how it does, because let's face it, I can say as much as I want about how the car looks, what it costs, how many bottles of wine you can fit in it, but ultimately, if it doesn't put a smile on my face down this road, what was the point? The car picks up nicely in third gear. Turbo's very, very smooth. It doesn't give you a big dump of power. The suspension is spectacularly good. I am struggling to recall the last time I went down this road in something that rode this well. And I'm not joking. I mean, literally, I'm putting that in unedited. In that space of about 400 to 500 meters, you know exactly what you need to know about this car. If you told me that this was a Lotus and they just stuck some funny badges on it, I would absolutely believe you. This is unreal how well this thing covers bad ground. And these roads are atrocious. These roads are absolutely awful. I've been driving them for about 15 years. I drove them from when I first had a moped, before I even had a driving license, and I know them very, very well, and they are awful. But for that very reason, they are an excellent test of a car. And I speak in my videos a lot about real world pace. You know, you put this next to a BMW 440, a modified 440, and you know, you put your foot down in both of them, the BMW is just gonna walk this. I mean, it's just gonna disappear. But the real world, at least the real world in the middle of nowhere in England where I live, and I don't live in somewhere surrounded by drag strips and all that sort of stuff, you know, quarter miles, this thing's fast. I mean, that's so well composed. That's mind-blowing how good that is. That's really quite sensational. And because this car is quite narrow, I mean, yeah, maybe, you know, if I was looking at it, I'd go, oh, I wish the car would be a bit wider because it would look better, but that would also make it a little less enjoyable on these kind of roads. And this is quite something. And there's not the most feedback from the steering. If I was going to criticize it, I would say that, but the chassis gives me a hell of a lot of feedback, and this thing feels really planted. Because it's turbo, you do get plenty of shove from fairly low down. It's not the most exciting of noises out the back, but right now that's not particularly bothering me. See, corners like that, they're tricky because it goes up and crests. You got to be careful over that one, because if you go over there too fast, you're going to end up in the field over there. The gearbox responds very well. The exhaust is crackling and burbling away, as I'm sure it's programmed to do because I'm in sports mode. And there is a Skoda Octavia. And look at how big it is on this road. I mean, this is a tiny road, I will confess, but this thing just ate it alive. I genuinely am scratching my head now to think of a car which has covered that road better. Sensible, yes, thank you. Now, maybe that's one of these cars' star qualities, because I know for a fact one of the reasons that many people buy something like a Cayman, a Boxster 911, that sort of thing, is because they know it's a good, fun, sporty car. They have their laughs in it and they love it to bits, and they'll hoon down roads. But then when the other half wants to drive it, or, you know, a mate wants to drive it, and they're not going to drive it in a spirited manner, well, they know that they can just get in it, take it to the shops, drive it like a normal car. You know, it's easy, the steering's light, there's nothing difficult about it. Something like an Elise, something like a 4C, you don't get in those kind of cars casually. You wouldn't just sort of nip down the shops in them. You know, I owned an Elise for a bit. I tried to daily it for a bit. It was a nightmare. It's just the getting in and out. I just didn't look forward to it. Unless I could take the roof off, it was a chore. And the last thing you want to do with a car is start with a difficult task, and when that's getting in and out of the car, that's a bit much. This thing though, because it does have that power steering, because it does have that auto box, you just let the other half drive it like a normal car. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a weird sort of driving position, and it's a slightly strange thing, and everyone's going to look at you because it'll look like it's come from space. Well, the 1960s version of space anyway. But it's really, really calm and nice in here. All I can really say at the end of this, and I've got very little more to say, is Alpine, can you please do another one? But can you put a bigger engine in it and make it just a little bit bigger, and put a bigger boot in it, and then maybe I'll buy one. But for a car company that, technically speaking, I know it's Renault, but Alpine didn't exist at all for about 20 years. And for them to come out with this, nice one, lads. Well done. I love it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed this little video. I'll see you for the next one. Please make sure to comment, hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.